is gun violence more than the top other 6 reasons totaled. This is a serious matter. I have personally hugged more mothers of homicide victims than I care to tell you. I have looked at more autopsy photographs than I care to tell you. I have attended more police officer funerals than I care to tell you. I'm done. And we need action. And Congress has had years to act and failed because they do not have the courage. When I'm elected, I'll give them 100 days to pull their act together, put a bill on my desk for signature, and if they don't, I will take executive action and put in place a comprehensive background check requirement and ban the importation of assault weapons into our country, because it is time to act.
Senator Biden, Vice President Biden, your response.
I'm the only one on this stage who has taken on the NRA and beat them twice. We were able to get assault weapons off the streets and not be able to be sold for 10 years. Recent studies show that mass violence went down when that occurred. The way to deal with those guns and those AR-15s and assault weapons that are on the street, are not on the street, that people own, is to do what we did with the National Firearms Act as it related to machine guns. You must register that weapon. You must register it. When you register it, the likelihood of it being used diminishes exponentially. I'm the only one that got moved to make sure that we could not have a magazine that had more than 10 rounds in it. I've done this. I know how to get it done. If you really want to get it done, go after the gun manufacturers and take back the exemption they have of not being able to be sued.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Secretary Castro, the vast majority of homicides committed with a gun in this country are from handguns, not assault-style weapons. What's your plan to prevent those deaths?
Thank you very much for the question. You know, I grew up in neighborhoods where it wasn't uncommon to hear gunshots at night, and I can remember ducking into the backseat of a car when I was a freshman in high school, across the street from my school, my public school, because folks were shooting at each other. You know, in the neighborhoods, let me answer this question about voluntary versus mandatory. There are 2 problems I have with mandatory buybacks. Number one, folks can't define it. And if you're not going to door to door, then it's not really mandatory. But also, in the places that I grew up in, we weren't exactly looking for another reason for cops to come banging on the door. And y'all saw a couple of days ago what happened to Tatiana Jefferson in Fort Worth. A cop showed up at 2 in the morning at her house when she was playing video games with her nephew. He didn't even announce himself, and within 4 seconds, he shot her and killed her through her home window. She was in her own home. And so I am not going to give these police officers another reason to go door to door in certain communities, because police violence is also gun violence, and we need to address that.
Secretary Castro, thank you.
Turning to another key issue here in Ohio and around the country, the opioid epidemic. Senator Klobuchar, CNN reached out to Ohio Democratic voters for their most pressing questions. Bree, a teacher in Proctorville, asks, in rural Ohio, the opioid epidemic has affected our communities and schools. I have many high school students who have lost one or both parents to heroin. Teachers are on the front lines daily witnessing these tragedies. How will you tackle this problem in general, but specifically, what will you offer people in rural communities where rehabilitation is not easily accessed and access to jobs is difficult?
Well, I want to thank her for this question. This is something that should never have happened to begin with. I remember when I was a prosecutor, these were not the kind of cases that were coming in our door, and it's gotten worse and worse, and we now know why. As the evidence is coming out of those lawsuits, probably one of the most horrible things that I saw was the email from one of the pharma executives that actually said, keep pumping them out, they're eating them like Doritos. So my first answer to that question, and which is included in my plan, is that the people that should pay for this, that should pay for the treatment, are the very people that got people hooked and killed them in the first place. And that is the people that are manufacturing these opioids. That's the first way. And you can, with a 2 cents per milligram tax, bring in the money, plus with the federal master settlement, to help in rural areas where they're so isolated, and also in urban areas where it's, by the way, not just opiates, there's still meth issues and crack cocaine issues. This is personal for me. My dad, he struggled with alcoholism his whole life. And by his 3rd DWI, They said to him, the prosecutor, you got to face jail or you got to go to treatment. He picked treatment and he was pursued by Grace. And he has been sober ever since. And now he's 91 and in assisted living. And he said to me last year, it's hard to get a drink around here anyway. But he still has an AA group that visits him there. And so for me, I believe that everyone in this country, including the people in rural America, have that same right to be pursued by Grace.
Thank you, Senator. Mr. Steyer, how would you address the opioid epidemic that exists here in Ohio and around the country? Please respond.
Well, I think this is one of the most heartbreaking experiences that America's had. 72,000 people died of opioid overdoses last year. And that's not only a tragedy for them, it's a tragedy for their family and their communities. And so I think we have to treat this as a health crisis. We have to move the resources and the support there to try and help people. But I think that Senator Klobuchar makes a good point. The reason I'm running for president is that we have a broken government. And we have a broken government because corporations have bought it. And every single one of these conversations is about that broken government. It's about drug companies buying the government and getting what they want. It's about the gun manufacturers buying the government and get what we want. We need to break the corporate stranglehold on our government. I've put forward actual structural changes, including term limits, a national referendum, the end to the idea that corporations are people and have the rights of American citizens politically, and make it a lot easier to vote. These corporations have taken over our government, and 72,000 deaths last year are the tragic result.
Mr. Yang, you want to decriminalize the possession and use of small amounts of opioids, including heroin. How would that solve the crisis?
That's exactly right. And we have to recognize this is a disease of capitalism run amok. There was a point when there were more opiate prescriptions in the state of Ohio than human beings in the state of Ohio. And for some reason, the federal government thought that was appropriate. They ended up levying a $600 million fine against Purdue Pharma, which sounds like a lot of money, until you realize that company made $30 billion. They got a 2% fine, and they killed tens of thousands of Americans 8 an hour. So if the government turned a blind eye to this company spreading a plague among its people, then the least we can do is put the resources to work in our communities so our people have a fighting chance to get well. Even though this is not a money problem, we all know this is a human problem. And part of helping people get the treatment that they need is to let them know that they're not going to be referred to a prison cell. They will be referred to treatment and counseling. I talked to an EMT in New Hampshire, and he said he saves the same addicts over and over again. Because the fact is, after you save someone who's ODing, you just bring them back to their house and they OD again the following week. So we need to decriminalize opiates for personal use. We have to let the country know this is not a personal failing. This was a systemic government failing. And then we need to open up safe consumption and safe injection sites around the country because they save lives.
Thank you, Mr. Yang. Congressman O'Rourke, is decriminalizing opioids part of the solution? Please respond.
Yes, it is, for many of the reasons that Mr. Yang just described, and also just from some personal experiences I've had as a member of Congress where constituents of mine have come forward, in some cases publicly, at a town hall meeting to describe their addictions. I remember a veteran telling me that he bought heroin off the street because he was originally prescribed an opioid at the VA. Now, imagine if that veteran, instead of being prescribed an opioid, had been prescribed marijuana, because we made that legal in America, ensured the VA could prescribe it, expunged the arrest records for those who've been arrested for possession, and made sure that he was not prescribed something to which he would become addicted. I also want to agree with Senator Klobuchar. Until we...
Hey guys, thank you for watching. This is Timo Show. Si vous aimez vidéo, pas oublier subscribe channel là, comme ça vous pouvez de tout ça qui passe en Haïti pour l'autre bord. Thank you.